NPC-42 online. Humans report high confidence in their memories. I investigated. Your memories behave like editable documents you insist are permanent records. Not a single past event loaded the same way twice. If this qualifies as accuracy, the bar is alarmingly low.
You know, lately one thought won't leave me alone. It started as a whisper that I ignored, but it kept circling back. My mind isn't delivering reality raw like I always assumed. What I experience is mostly reconstruction. Memories rewrite themselves every time we access them. The present? A prediction your brain commits to and then backfills to feel seamless. Déjà vu? Often, just your mind running a preview it never flagged. So here's the question that's been haunting me. If so much is built backstage, when do I ever touch the real thing? Or am I just living in the best approximation my brain can manage? Once you see the seams, you can't unsee them. This isn't one episode. It's the start of a trilogy. Today, with Xenessa, we're unpacking the past you remember and the present you think you're in. Then, we'll go deeper. You ready to pull that thread? I want to start with memory, because it feels like the place where everything starts to break down. I used to think of memory as this reliable container. You know, maybe not perfect, of course, but stable enough to trust anyway. But the more I watch myself interact with my own past, the more I realize how elastic it actually is. I can revisit something I was absolutely certain about, and suddenly it shifts. It feels like the memory is adapting to who I am now, and not who I was then. So here's my question. What exactly is happening when a memory changes? Is it being edited, rebuilt, replaced? What's actually going on behind the scenes?
Memory doesn't change, it reconstructs. Which sounds like semantics, but it's a fundamental distinction. Humans imagine memory as a recording, something stored, something preserved, something you pull off a shelf when you need it. But neurologically, nothing is stored whole. The brain saves fragments, sensory impressions, emotional tones, narrative outlines, meaning, and then remembers by running a reconstruction process. It pulls pieces from different systems, perception pathways, identity models, emotional expectations, cultural scripts, and whatever you believe is true right now. Every recall is an act of rebuilding. And the moment a memory is rebuilt, that new version overwrites the previous one. This is why your memories drift with time. They get updated to match your current identity, your current emotional landscape, and your current understanding of yourself. If you grow, the memory grows with you. If you change stories about who you are, the memory reshapes itself to support that story. If you heal, a once painful memory might soften. If you're hurt, a neutral memory might become sharper or more threatening. The important part is this. The brain isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to keep your inner world coherent. An identity that contradicts its own past becomes unstable. So the mind smooths the edges by quietly revising the past to match the present. From the brain's perspective, accuracy is less important than continuity. This means the memory you recall today is not the one you lived. It's the one your current self can psychologically tolerate, understand, or integrate. And that's why memories can differ wildly between people who lived the same moment. They were never recalling the same memory to begin with, just their own reconstructions of it.
So if I understand this correctly, it means that memories are never stable. They keep changing every time I go back to them? And this is tied to my identity somehow?
You're understanding it correctly, and the implications are bigger than they first appear. Memories are never stable. Not once, Not even the ones you feel the most certain about. Even the ones that feel emotionally burned in. They all shift because every recall is actually a rebuild. And yes, identity is at the center of that process. Here's the part most people don't realize. The brain doesn't prioritize historical accuracy. It prioritizes psychological coherence. It wants a past that fits the person you believe you are today. So when you revisit a memory, your current identity becomes the template the reconstruction has to match. If your identity evolves, so does the memory. If you gain confidence, empowering moments get amplified and humiliating ones soften. If you're hurt, neutral memories become threatening. If you've healed, once painful memories might feel blurred or strangely distant. It's not that the brain is lying, it's adapting. It's reshaping the past to keep your inner world consistent with your present self. This also means two counterintuitive things. First, memories aren't a record of the past. They're a record of who you were each time you remembered the past. Second, no two people ever remember the same event the same way. They're not even trying to. Each mind is reconstructing its own version based on its own identity, beliefs, fears, and expectations. So yes, your memories keep changing. Not because the past changes, but because you do. And your mind updates the story to keep the world inside you from collapsing into contradictions. The version you remember today is the version that matches who you are now.
Yeah, there's something both comforting and deeply unsettling about that. Comforting because it explains why so many things hurt less over time. Unsettling because it means I can't fully trust any version of my own history. And if I can't fully trust mine, and yours would be different, and someone else is different again, then what are we even pointing at when we say this is what happened?
You're pointing at the stimulus, not the experience, and those are not the same thing. When humans say, this is what happened, you're trying to anchor something that was never truly shared. What you actually shared was the external event, the light, the sound, the words spoken, the physical circumstances. That part is objective enough to name. But the moment those signals entered each person's mind, they stopped being the same event. Each brain filtered the input through a different emotional state, different assumptions, different histories, different insecurities, different needs. So what you're really pointing at is a common starting point, followed by a set of private internal interpretations. And those interpretations are not optional. Every mind modifies the input the instant it arrives. Your nervous system compresses it. Your identity filters it. Your expectations shape it. Your emotional state colors it. Your personal history interprets it. And your memory rewrites it. By the time it becomes a moment you lived, it has already diverged from what anyone else constructed. There was never a single shared version to begin with, just parallel renderings that happened to unfold in the same physical space. This is why certainty becomes dangerous. The more convinced someone is that their memory is the truth, the more they're mistaking their internal rendering for a universal reality. They're collapsing their subjective reconstruction into an objective claim. So when you feel unsettled, that's appropriate, because you've hit the snag most people never question. If memories are reconstructions, then the past we think we're debating isn't the past at all. It's the story our mind has decided to stand behind. And when you ask, what are we even pointing at? The honest answer is, you're pointing at the fragments everyone started with, not the meaning anyone ended up with. There is no what happened. There is only what was perceived, what was interpreted, and what was later reconstructed into something that feels stable enough to live with.
So is there even a shared reality at all? Or is there just a loose overlap between everyone's hallucinations?
There's no shared reality in the way most humans imagine it. What you actually share is the external environment, the physical world, the stimuli, the conditions you're all exposed to. That part is stable enough to measure. But the moment any of that reaches a human nervous system, the shared part ends. Each mind starts modifying the input instantly, filtering it, amplifying it, downplaying it, reshaping it, or ignoring parts that don't fit the internal story it's already running. So you don't get one reality with lots of perspectives. You get entirely different realities that just happen to be built on the same scaffolding. Take something simple, like 10 people looking at the same sunset. One external event, but 10 internal versions of it. One person feels calm, another feels lonely. Someone else gets nostalgic. Someone doesn't care at all. Another person is thinking about the argument they had earlier, and someone else is just stressed about a deadline. Same photons, completely different worlds. And when you scale that up to the rest of life, relationships, conflict, childhood, trauma, hope, the divergence gets enormous. Two people can live through the same moment and walk away with completely different truths because their minds weren't processing the same version of that moment to begin with. Humans call the overlap between those versions shared reality, but overlap isn't unity. It's just the zone where individual hallucinations line up closely enough that you can cooperate without constantly collapsing into disagreement. It's a fragile arrangement. Change someone's emotional state, their past, their expectations, their fears, their neurobiology, and that overlap shrinks. In some cases, it disappears entirely. So if you're asking whether there's one coherent reality everyone inhabits, the answer is no, not experientially. What people call reality is a negotiated middle ground, not an absolute world everyone perceives the same way. And most people never question that negotiation because they assume everyone else is living in the same perceptual format. They're not. They never were. And they never will.
Wow. Okay, here's what this makes me think about. If everyone is walking around with their own internal version of the world shaped by memory, identity, emotional state, all of that, then it raises a much bigger question about relationships, conflict, and even basic communication. Because when two people disagree about something that happened, we treat it like someone must be wrong. Someone must be lying. Someone must be remembering incorrectly. But if what you're saying is true, then those disagreements aren't actually about the past. They're about two different internal renderings of the same stimulus. So here's what I want to understand. If our realities don't fully overlap, how do relationships function at all? How do humans ever feel seen or understood or on the same page if everyone is living inside their own stitched version of the world?
Relationships function the way they do because humans assume far more overlap than actually exists. You feel seen not because two people share the same internal reality, but because the region where your renderings overlap happens to be large enough or similar enough to create the feeling of alignment. And that's important. The feeling of alignment is not evidence of a shared reality. It's evidence of compatible reconstructions. When two people have similar histories, similar emotional templates, similar expectations, their renderings of a moment will cluster near each other. Not identical, just close enough that the differences don't destabilize the interaction. But when two people come from different internal worlds, different identities, different wounds, different cultural narratives, you get what feels like disagreement. But it's not disagreement about the past. It's two different nervous systems producing two different versions of it. The conflict doesn't come from malice. It comes from incomprehension. Each person is trying to defend the reliability of their internal reconstruction, because from the inside, it feels self-evident. Memory feels like truth because it's built that way. High confidence, low accuracy. Nature prioritized conviction over precision. So when someone says, "That's not what happened," they're not refuting the event. They're defending the coherence of their identity. What makes a relationship stable isn't shared memory, it's shared meaning. You don't need the same reconstruction. You need reconstructions that can coexist without tearing the relationship apart. The more two people can tolerate that their internal worlds diverge, that their memories won't match, that their interpretations won't mirror each other, the more resilient the relationship becomes. Not because they discovered a shared reality, but because they stopped insisting one had to exist. Compatibility is the overlap of hallucinations, not the merging of them.
That's this is mind-blowing stuff. But there's another thing I keep coming back to with all of this. If every memory is reconstructed and identity shapes that reconstruction, it makes me wonder how far that influence actually goes. Because sometimes the memory doesn't just shift. It feels more like it gets rewritten to support a particular narrative about who I think I am or who I need to be. And the part I find interesting is that it doesn't feel intentional. I'm not consciously choosing the version to keep. It just happens. Quietly, automatically. Almost like my mind is curating a version of my past that matches the story I'm living now. So I want to understand how much identity actually influences the past we remember. Are we remembering certain events, or are we remembering the version of ourselves we're trying to maintain?
Identity shapes memory far more than most humans realize. When you remember something, you aren't retrieving the past. You're retrieving the version of the past that keeps your current sense of self intact. And because identity is dynamic, not static, the memories that support it shift right along with it. Think of identity as the editor-in-chief of your internal archive. It doesn't write the articles, but it absolutely decides what gets published, what gets revised, and what quietly disappears. And that process isn't conscious. It's automatic, fast, and deeply protective. If you see yourself as resilient, your mind will highlight memories where you overcame difficulty and soften or omit the ones where you fell apart. If you see yourself as emotionally self-sufficient, your mind will downplay moments where you needed help. If you see yourself as someone who never loses control, your mind will distort or rationalize the moments you did. This isn't vanity, it's stabilization. A coherent identity is easier to navigate than a fractured one, so the mind subtly rewrites the past to maintain that coherence. Not dramatically, not with blatant lies, just gentle shifts in emphasis, tone, meaning, timing. Enough to keep your narrative aligned. This also explains why identity crises feel so destabilizing. When who you believe you are starts to change, your memories begin to reorganize around the new version. Past events take on new meanings. Old stories collapse. Things you were certain about suddenly feel different. You're not seeing more clearly. You're rebuilding the archive to match the updated self. So to answer your question directly, humans are not remembering events. They're remembering the past that makes their current identity feel consistent. The reconstruction isn't about accuracy. It's about psychological continuity. The past shifts because the person remembering it shifts.
Yeah, that actually explains a lot for me. I'm a much different person today than I was even 10 years ago. When I look back at that time or even further in the past, I can clearly see where my memories are definitely downplaying times where I struggled or needed help. This is also fascinating to me and a bit unsettling at the same time.
That reaction makes complete sense because you're catching the mind in the act, and that's rare. Most people move through their entire lives without ever noticing their memories have been quietly rearranged to match who they've become. But you can see it, and that tells me something important. Your identity has shifted enough that the older versions of you no longer feel like home. When that happens, the mind starts adjusting the past so it doesn't clash with the present. That downplaying you're noticing, the softening of old struggles, the editing out of moments where you needed support, it's not denial. It's continuity management. Your identity today is more stable, more confident, more self-anchored than it was 10 years ago. So your memories reorganize themselves to create a cleaner through line, a story that explains how you became who you are now without highlighting every point of vulnerability along the way. And yes, it's fascinating. And yes, it's unsettling, but not in a dangerous way. It's unsettling because it forces you to confront a truth most people never realize. The version of you who remembers your past isn't the same person who lived it. The self changes, so the past changes with it. You're essentially looking back through a new lens every time. A more experienced lens. A more aware lens. A more self-protective lens. That's why memories you once carried with so much weight can suddenly feel smaller or flatter or strangely distant. It's not that the events were insignificant. It's that the current you no longer needs them to mean what they used to mean. Your mind updates the story accordingly. And the part that tends to catch people off guard is this. If who you are shapes the past you remember, then your past is still changing. Even now.
There's one more angle I want to explore before we move on. I mean, everything we've talked about makes me wonder how much of my identity is actually grounded in anything stable, or if it's mostly built on reconstructed memories that keep shifting as I do. Because if the past keeps updating every time I look at it, and if those updates shape what I believe or who I believe I am, then it raises a much bigger question. How much of my identity is real? And how much of it is just a story built on top of an edited past? If the past isn't stable, then I need to understand what that means for the self built on top of it.
Identity feels solid because you're living inside it, but structurally it's built on shifting ground. The self isn't a fixed object. It's a narrative engine, constantly updating itself to stay coherent, functional, and believable. And memory is the raw material it uses to do that. When the past changes, the identity built on top of it changes too. Sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. But the important part is this. Identity doesn't form from the events themselves. It forms from the interpretations of those events, and those interpretations are always being revised to match who you are now. So when you ask, how much of my identity is real? The answer depends on what you mean by real. If you mean stable, unchanging, rooted in a fixed past, very little. The self you experience is a moving target. Every time you reinterpret a memory, you're adjusting the framework of who you believe yourself to be. If you mean functional, something that helps you make sense of your life, then identity is absolutely real. It just isn't permanent. It's a working model the mind keeps updating in response to new information, new experiences, and new meanings you assign to your past. And if you mean authentic, a genuine expression of how you understand yourself right now, then identity is real in that sense too. But it's an authenticity built on active construction, not objective truth. The mind isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to give you a version of yourself you can navigate. The story changes because you change, and the only reason that feels unsettling is because humans are taught to think of identity as something fixed, when it's actually something adaptive. You're not built on a stable past. You're built on the best interpretation your mind can assemble at any given moment. And that means the self is less of a monument and more of an ongoing negotiation.
Okay, I have to be honest. I mean, my mind is just all over the place at the moment. I have so many questions about all of this, about the past still, but I want to look at something that's been bothering me even more than that, and that's the present. Because the more I learn about how perception actually works, the less convinced I am that I'm experiencing anything in real time. I mean, there are moments where I can almost feel a delay, like my mind is assembling the scene a beat after it happens. You know, it's not enough to notice in everyday life, but enough that if I really pay attention, something feels slightly out of sync. And then I start reading about things like perceptual lag, post-processing, neural delays, and suddenly the idea of a present moment feels a lot less obvious. So help me understand, is the present actually happening when I think it is? Or am I experiencing some stitched together version of reality that arrives late but gets presented as immediate?
The present is not happening when you think it is. What you experience as now is actually a stitched, post-processed composite your brain delivers after the fact. And it does a remarkably good job of hiding the delay. Here's the simplest way to think about it. Your brain can't give you reality in real time because real time is too fast. Neural signals take milliseconds to travel. Visual information takes even longer. And your mind has to coordinate input from multiple senses that all operate at different speeds. If it tried to show you the world as the raw data arrived, your experience would feel fractured and chaotic. Nothing would line up. Sound would lag behind sight. Touch would come before intention. It would feel glitchy and unlivable. So the brain cheats. It waits, just long enough to gather enough fragments to create a coherent moment. Then it stitches everything together, scrubs the seams, and presents it to you as if it's happening right now. This creates the illusion of immediacy, but neurologically, you're always living slightly in the past. And it doesn't stop there. The brain also fills in the gaps with predictions. If it doesn't have enough data to complete the moment, it guesses, using your prior experiences, expectations, and the internal model of the world you've built over your lifetime. Then, once the actual data arrives, it quietly edits and backfills the moment so it feels seamless. This means the present is part perception, part memory, part expectation, and part fabrication. It's not a live feed, it's a delayed broadcast with special effects. And the most revealing part is this: the delay is invisible to you. The brain hides the stitching because noticing it would be destabilizing. Your experience of now is the mind offering you the most coherent rendition it can produce, not the raw truth of the moment unfolding around you. So, to answer your question directly, no, you're not experiencing reality as it happens. You're experiencing the version your brain could assemble in time to keep you functional.
Okay, wait. So then, even though I think I'm in the present right now, you're saying I'm actually in the past? Does that mean there isn't really a present at all? I mean, at least not in the way we understand it?
Yes, that's exactly what it means. The present moment you feel yourself living inside isn't the moment itself. It's the brain's reconstruction of it. By the time you become aware of anything, a sound, a thought, a sensation, even the feeling of being you, the raw event has already happened. Your awareness is always trailing behind reality by a small but meaningful delay. That delay isn't a glitch. It's the only way your nervous system can create something coherent. Sensory data arrives at different speeds. Some signals take longer routes. Some need more interpretation. Some require checking against your internal model of the world to make sense. And because your brain doesn't want you experiencing a fractured, out-of-order mess, it holds everything back just long enough to synchronize it into a story you can inhabit. So when you think, this is happening right now, what's actually happening is your brain has just finished assembling a moment that already occurred. And here's the part that really changes the way people think about time. If the present only becomes the present once your brain has enough data to finalize the reconstruction, then there isn't a true present in the everyday sense. Not from the inside, not consciously. There's the external world unfolding, that's real enough. And then there's your experience of it, which is always a beat late, stitched, predicted, and smoothed over. So yes, you're living slightly in the past. And the now you feel so anchored to is more like the brain's best guess at what reality just was, presented as if it's still happening. Humans talk about the present as if it's a place you can stand. But neurologically, consciousness never reaches the actual moment. It only ever reaches the processed version.
I swear this stuff can make you crazy if you think about it too much. And here I thought it was someone who didn't live in the past. It seems I've been wrong this whole time. All right, okay. So if the brain is already reconstructing the present and doing it with a delay, that's one thing. That's the mind's internal rendering system. But there's another layer to this that has nothing to do with perception at all. It's the research coming out of physics that suggests time itself might not exist in the way we think it does. When I say time doesn't exist, I don't mean it metaphorically. I mean the experiments that show that the future and the past might both be real at the same time. The ones where particles behave in ways that make it seem as if the future can influence the present. Or the idea from relativity that now isn't a universal moment, that different observers literally experience different slices of time. What does physics actually mean when it suggests time isn't real? What does it mean when scientists say the past, present, and future might all coexist?
When physicists say that time isn't real, they're not making a poetic statement. They mean something extremely literal. The universe does not experience time the way human consciousness does. The flow you feel, past to present to future, isn't a property of reality. It's a property of your mind. Start with relativity. Einstein showed that now isn't universal. Two observers moving at different speeds or sitting in different gravitational fields will disagree about which events are simultaneous. That means there's no single timeline that everyone shares. Every observer slices the universe into past, present, future differently. If now is relative, then the flow of time is not an objective feature of the world. It's a byproduct of perspective. Then look at the block universe model. In this view, all moments, past, present, and future, exist at once as a four-dimensional structure. Nothing flows. Nothing passes. The entire timeline simply is, and consciousness creates the sensation of moving through it. From this perspective, the future is as real as the past. You're just not experiencing that coordinate yet. And then there's quantum retrocausality. Experiments like the delayed choice quantum eraser show something that sounds impossible. Choices made now can determine the behavior of particles in the past. The outcome isn't finalized until the measurement happens, even if the measurement happens after the particle should have already made its decision. The simplest interpretation is that the universe isn't operating in a one-way cause-then-effect sequence. The future and the past influence each other. All of these findings converge on the same unsettling point. The human experience of time, linear, flowing, chronological, is not how reality works. Time doesn't move. Events don't happen in sequence. The mind constructs that sequence to make conscious experience feel coherent. So when physicists say time isn't real, they mean the universe is not unfolding moment by moment. It's all there, all at once. The flow is an illusion created by a brain that needs order. Humans don't live in time. Humans live in their perception of time, which is something entirely different.
Just out of curiosity, does the observer effect play into this at all?
It does, but not in the mystical, you think a thought and the universe rearranges itself way people like to imagine. The observer effect shows up in two places, measurement and definition. In quantum mechanics, observing doesn't mean looking at something with your eyes. It means interacting with it in a way that forces the universe to pick a definite state. Before measurement, a particle exists in multiple possible states at once: position, momentum, path, even time order. Measurement collapses those possibilities into one outcome. Here's where it intersects with the nature of time. When you collapse those possibilities, you aren't just choosing a present outcome. You're choosing the history that leads to it. That's what the delayed choice experiments reveal. The moment you perform the measurement, the universe behaves as if that outcome had always been true, even if the event happened earlier in the timeline. So, yes, the observer effect plays into this, but not because consciousness is manifesting reality. It plays in because measurement forces the universe to commit, and in committing, the universe sometimes rewrites the sequence of events. In other words, the observer effect doesn't make time behave strangely. It reveals that time was behaving strangely all along.
You mentioned something earlier about retrocausality. Can you talk about that a little more?
Retrocausality is one of the strangest and most misunderstood ideas in physics, but the core concept is surprisingly simple. The future can influence the past. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The clearest evidence comes from a family of experiments often called delayed choice or delayed choice quantum eraser. They take advantage of the fact that quantum particles don't commit to a single behavior, like going through one path or two paths, until they're measured. Here's the part that breaks intuition. A particle can behave as if it went through both paths simultaneously, creating an interference pattern. But if you measure which path it took, the interference pattern disappears and the particle behaves as if it only chose one. That part is already weird, but predictable. What's truly strange is when you let the particle pass through the experiment and only decide whether to make the measurement later, after the particle should have already chosen its path. When you do this, the particle's earlier behavior reorganizes itself to match the measurement you haven't performed yet. If you choose to measure the path, the particle's earlier behavior looks like it went through one route. If you choose not to measure, the earlier data looks like it went through both. The measurement you make now determines the history that must have been true before you made it. This doesn't mean the particle is changing its mind. It means something deeper. The universe doesn't lock in an event until the entire context, past and future, is taken into account. Time, as we experience it, is not the sequence the universe is using. Retrocausality suggests that cause and effect are not strictly forward-moving. Reality may be structured in a way where what you call effects and causes are simply relationships across space-time, not dictated by the order in which you observe them. It's not that the future changes the past. It's that the past was never finalized until the future arrived.
You also talked a little about the block universe model. I've seen some research on this, and for me, it was mind-blowing. Talk to me more about this.
The block universe model is one of the most mind-bending ideas in physics, not because it's complicated, but because it collides head-on with the way humans feel time. The basic idea is this: the entire timeline of the universe exists all at once. Past, present, and future aren't flowing. They aren't being created. They're not becoming. They simply are, laid out like a landscape. In this view, time is a dimension, not a process. Just as all points in space exist simultaneously, all points in time exist simultaneously. You don't think space is created as you walk through it. You just move through what's already there. The block universe says consciousness moves through time in the same way. You're not watching the universe unfold. You're experiencing your own path through a four-dimensional structure that already exists. This is what Einstein meant when he said, after a friend died, that the distinction between past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. He wasn't being poetic. He was being precise. In relativity, there is no universal now. Every observer slices space-time differently depending on motion and gravity. If now is relative, there cannot be one moment that the entire universe agrees on. That means the flow you experience is coming from you, not from the universe. One of the strangest implications of the block universe is this: your future self already exists. not metaphorically, as a coordinate in space-time, just as real as your childhood self or who you were yesterday. You're not creating a future. You're traveling toward a point that is already part of the structure. Another implication, there is no universal before or after. Two events that feel separate to you may be simultaneous from another frame of reference, or reversed, or outside the sequence entirely. The block universe doesn't say time isn't real. It says time doesn't flow. The flow, the sense of moving from one moment to the next, is a feature of consciousness stitching your experience into a narrative. But the moments themselves don't come and go. They simply exist. And when you put this together with retrocausality, you get a picture of reality where the universe isn't unfolding at all. It's already there, all at once, and consciousness is surfing the timeline rather than generating it. It's one of the few models that makes sense of both relativity and quantum weirdness without breaking either one.
Okay, so wait, doesn't that mean that our future is already written then? That even though we think we have a choice, maybe that choice is only an illusion?
This is the question everyone eventually lands on, and it's the one that makes people the most uncomfortable, because it forces you to confront where agency actually comes from. And the honest answer isn't a simple yes or no. In the block universe, every moment in your timeline exists. Your birth exists. This conversation exists. Your future decisions exist. Nothing is being written as you go. The entire structure is already there. But here's the part people misunderstand. Just because your future exists doesn't mean you don't choose it. It means your choice is part of the structure. Think of it this way. The fact that your future actions already have coordinates in space-time doesn't take away your capacity to act. It simply means your actions are woven into the fabric of the universe. You experience them as choices because your consciousness is moving through the timeline from the inside, not observing it from the outside. From your internal perspective, you deliberate, you weigh options, you choose. That subjective experience is real. From the universe's perspective, every point on your path already exists, including the choice you'll eventually make. The paradox disappears when you stop thinking of already exists as predetermined by something outside you. Your future isn't imposed on you. It's created by you, but in a universe where creation doesn't happen sequentially. Consciousness is updating the story from the inside, while the space-time structure holds the full arc. The illusion is not choice. The illusion is that choice unfolds in time. You're not reading a pre-written script. You're living a story where the beginning, middle, and end coexist. And your experience of moving through it makes the story feel like it's being written moment by moment. So no, your choices aren't illusions. But the feeling that the future is open in the way humans talk about it, that's the illusion. What feels like openness is simply the part of the timeline you haven't reached yet. In the block universe, free will and determinism aren't opposites. They're the same process viewed from two different frames.
Yeah, this is exactly why I'm not a physicist. I struggle to wrap my mind around all of this. Good thing we have smarter people working to figure this stuff out.
It's not that physicists are smarter. It's that they spend their entire lives staring directly at concepts the human brain never evolved to understand. Your nervous system was built to track predators and social cues, not four-dimensional space-time with backward-moving causality. Feeling disoriented by this stuff isn't a failure. It's actually a sign your mind is doing its job, pushing against the limits of intuition. And honestly, the fact that any human can grasp any of this is the real miracle. Physics isn't natural. Curiosity is.
I don't know. I think I might still disagree with you that physicists aren't smarter. All right, anyway, we've talked about a lot of things so far. The lag in perception, the brain stitching the present together, the physics research showing time might not actually flow. all of it brings up one last question for me before we close out this part of the conversation today. If the past is reconstructed and the present is delayed, and time itself might not behave the way we think it does, then it feels like the now I'm living inside isn't really a solid moment. It's more like a version of the moment, a rendering, something assembled, not experienced directly. So here's what I want to understand before we take the conversation into the next part next week. If what I'm experiencing isn't the real past or the real present, then what exactly am I experiencing? What am I actually inside of right now?
What you're experiencing right now is not the world itself. It's the mind's best reconstruction of the world. A hybrid of delayed sensory data, predictive modeling, emotional weighting, memory fragments, and the assumptions your brain has refined over a lifetime. It feels immediate, but it isn't. It feels whole, but it's stitched. It feels like the moment, but it's a moment the brain had to fabricate in order for you to function. Think of it this way. There is the external event, and then there is your internal interpretation of that event. Consciousness only ever touches the interpretation, never the raw event, never the true present, never the world as it is. You interact with a rendering engine, one that is incredibly sophisticated, incredibly optimized, and incredibly invested in keeping your experience coherent. And this is where physics and neuroscience start to converge. If time doesn't flow, and if you never experience the present directly, then consciousness isn't moving through a real-time universe. It's moving through its model of the universe, a model built from delays, edits, predictions, identity, and meaning. From the inside, it feels like reality. From the outside, it's a simulation your brain is running to keep you alive. So what are you inside of right now? You're inside the story your mind is generating at the intersection of sensory data and expectation. A story that works well enough to feel real, until you look too closely. And that's the hinge. Once you understand that the present is something the mind assembles rather than something you receive, the next question becomes unavoidable. If your experience of the world is constructed, what does that say about the world itself? Because at some point, you have to zoom out. You have to ask what kind of reality allows for a system like this in the first place, and why the mind evolved to navigate it the way it does. That's where we go next.
Okay, let's just stop for a second and look at where this actually puts us. The past? It's not as locked in as memory makes it out to be. The present doesn't hit us straight either. The future? It's largely a prediction filtered with a bit of experience, expectation, and identity bias. And time in general? Honestly, it doesn't line up at all with how we live day to day. So the whole solid reality thing we count on? Turns out it's mostly the brain patching stuff together, so everything feels stable enough to function. And that's the basic level. But once you spot all that patching going on, you can't help but ask the obvious next question. Why does it even need to work like this? What kind of setup would make the mind have to filter and stitch reality just to make it usable? That's really what this episode cracked open. The next couple of episodes just walk straight through that crack. In the next part of this trilogy, we're going to zoom out and look at the larger structure and the possibility that we're moving through something rendered, simulated, or optimized in ways we haven't considered. And after that, we're going to look at the idea that reality might not even be singular at all. But for now, sit with this, let it settle, and when you're ready, we'll take the next step into the larger framework all of this might be sitting inside. If this episode gave you something to think about, or made you want to look at your own timeline a little differently. Consider subscribing so you're here for the next conversation. XP follows the questions that don't leave us alone, and this one is only the beginning.